Signal for liftoff in T-minus 30.
Stand by for further instructions, Minnesota Black Robe Regiment.
Secondary guidance systems engaged.
Minnesota Black Robe Regiment, it will be on my mark.
All systems are go. All systems are go.
Minnesota Black Robe Regiment, you are over the target. You are authorized to fire at will.
Hey, thanks for stopping by a different TC and Friends Monday Night Musings. This is pre-recorded because I really wanted to have this guest on, and Monday evenings, he goes to bed way early, and you guys know I start my show way late for some people. For the rest of us human beings, it's just normal 8 o'clock, but for everyone else, it's kind of late. So we pre-recorded this, so you guys will can interact in the live chat as you watch the premiere, which is great, and I will be trying to watch it as well. But my guest could do Saturday for a recording time and a day, and that's what we're doing. And I'm really excited to have him on. As you guys know, I don't get real starstruck very often. I really don't. I've had some pretty big personalities on. I've had Dr. Scott Jensen. I've had Spike Cohen. I've had Clint Russell, Monica Perez. I've run the gambit with people on the show, from the different series for TC and Friends Monday Night Musings to Libertarian Lowdown, but I've never had an author on who I have read and found myself going, this guy is a powerhouse. And I have to, give credit where credit is due to my friend Jake Wiskerson from Guns and Mental Health and Noggin Notes. He helped me make this connection because he told me, TC, you got some problems. You need to read this guy's book. And he wasn't wrong. I do have problems. I have read the book, and I'm still not fixed, folks. I'm not, and it's not because of the book. It's because the book kind of laid me bare, is what it did. It laid me bare, but it also did something else for me. It made me realize that some of the observations that I had been making over the last 15 years, but especially over the last 10 years, and then now really intently over the last 4 years, it made me realize that some of my theories about people in the law enforcement community, in the law enforcement career field, weren't as far afield as I initially thought they were. And when you look at people who are in therapeutic practices, therapists, psychologists, and whatnot, they talk an awful lot about affirmation. So I read Walking Through Anger, and I really started to dive into Dr. Conte's yield theory and his approach to working with people in high stress positions, whether they be in law enforcement, corrections, or people who are incarcerated in the penitentiary system. There's something to be said for meeting them where they are, which is where I tried to be as a deputy in the detention center in the third largest metro area in the state of Minnesota. And just yesterday, I was taking a break from the job that I have now. And as I was walking into the convenience store, I heard someone holler my name. And at first I didn't note it. And like, they made a point. They were beating on their car window and yelling my name. And I'm like, this may not end well. And I turned around, and it was a former frequent flyer from the local detention center. And he said, and excuse the emotion because it's just an important part of the conversation we're going to have. I haven't seen you for a while, and I just wanted to tell you thank you. And it was timely, because I've been angry at some stuff that's going on with my former agency, and I feel like they're losing control. They're losing the grip. And the people that I run into who are going through the system now keep talking about how much it's changed. And it was nice to have that affirmation that I was doing the job well and I was doing it right. And when I picked up Walking Through Anger and I was reading about yield theory and some of Dr. Conte's experiences, I was like, there's affirmation in this. And so I just said, I listened to Dr. Conte on Guns and Mental Health with Jake and his crew from Walk to Talk America. And I'm like, I got to get this guy on because, folks, my view is law enforcement community, the law enforcement career field needs a massive amount of reform because there are days they're not that far removed from the people that they're dealing with. A lot of the same personality problems and a lot of the same concerns and issues. And I think that Dr. Conte is going to be able to help us see that, help us shed some light on some of the observations that I've made. And you guys know how I do this. I'm a free flow conversationalist. I don't have any pre-planned questions. So without any further ado, before we bring him in, you guys go over, check out my Subscribe Star, pick a level of support over there, help me keep the internet and the electricity on, especially in the winter in Minnesota. I'm going to need it. And if you're interested in any of the merchandise, the hats, the mugs, whatever, you can email me, mbrrpodcast@yahoo.com until I finally get a store going. And without any further ado, Dr. Conte, thank you so much for making yourself available today.
Thanks for having me. I love that you love Jake. Jake's awesome, man.
Oh, Jake's phenomenal. And we text like every day.
Yeah, he's
because he doesn't actually have to work. His people make all of his money for him.
I know, but he's one of the best. Hat doesn't stay on straight.
It looks, but no, go back to the hat. You look like an old newsboy there.
I do. Yeah. I am kind of like a newsboy here with this. I loved it because my pap used to wear a hat like this. It's really funny when you look into the camera, it turns it crooked, so it looks like it's crooked. It's just so funny.
No, you look sharp and not at all like what? How does Jake has described you as not a normal person's perspective of what a therapist and a psychologist would be. And I think you even describe yourself as a tattooed motorcycle looking guy. And people are like, you do what for a living? So
I don't think anybody's ever guessed what I do for a living when I meet them.
Like, so first of all, was there some place in your life you're like, I want to be a motorcycle gang member and a psychologist. I have to pick one or the other, and it was just like psychologist, I guess.
Yeah, I guess I might as well do that. No, you know what? I never liked dressing up. I went to military school.
Ooh.
So when I went to military school, I love how I say when I went to military school, I was sent to military school. Right, way to phrase it. But when I was in military school, they made us shave every day, and I'll never forget when it was postgraduate year. So when I left there, I never really wanted to shave again. I didn't really like dressing up. I didn't like the pretentiousness of any of that stuff. I think I was always able. I can't sing. I can't dance. The one skill I have is reading people. But I tell you that my whole life, like I always saw behind the curtain. And so for people who were like present one way, but then say and do other things, that just got to me. So I never really wanted to be that. So I always wanted to work for myself so that I could just dress how I wanted to dress and be myself.
I've heard a lot of people have a lot of different motivations for wanting to be self-employed. It was never, I just want to wear what I want to wear. And that's so We have a first, ladies and gentlemen.
Not gonna lie. I mean, literally, I thought if I'm being told constantly. So I got a temporary job in a summertime one time, and I was at this like 5-star restaurant. I was gonna be a waiter or bartender or something, and they made me shave. On day 2, I walked in and they said, "Well, you didn't shave." I said, "I shaved yesterday. What are you talking about?" They were like, "You gotta shave every day," and I was like, "That's ridiculous." So I immediately had to leave that position and try a different one.
So what you're saying is that your now stable life was not always so stable.
Of course. And I don't like being told what to do. And I don't like when people I really cherish freedom. My grandfather fought in World War II. So I come from a family where people put their lives on the line to give us these freedoms. And I believe that I cherish freedoms. I think that's something that, like, I definitely honor the people. I work with a lot of people in military, and recently partnered with one of the most phenomenal human beings on the planet, Jason Henderson, former not only SEAL Team 6, but like SEAL Team 6 leader for 20 years. And he and I did a course for veterans, and to know what he did for all of us to keep us to have freedoms. So for me, I cherish those, and I really love the idea. And I respect people's differences. I love when people have a different opinion, a different perspective. I think that's awesome. I think it would be boring if everybody had the same perspective and opinion.
I could not live in that kind of echo chamber. That would drive me absolutely bonkers.
Yeah, I mean, I'm blessed with a wife. My wife and I have been married for 23 years, and my wife will challenge me on anything and everything, and I love it. Like, I'm thankful for her, because she will never let me get away with having a thought that wasn't effective. She would challenge me on it in a second. So I've been blessed with that for sure. And listen, this show, what we're going to talk about today, is going to be super exciting. If anyone out there hears snoring, I have a 120-pound Cane Corso, and I do believe she just tore her second ACL. She's recovering from her first ACL surgery, and like right before we started on this, I'm texting you going, "Hey man, my dog, she came running down the steps and yelped, and I never heard her really yelp like that. I feel sick." So I brought her in my office, and she's lying down. So she's snoring, which I'm grateful that she's actually sleeping, because I don't want her to be in pain at all.
Just so you're aware, no one expects professionalism on my show. So don't worry about the extra noise. I think half the time I got chicken noises in the background here. So
nice.
Because my studio, I may or may not have illegal backyard chickens that they don't want me to have.
Okay.
I may or may not.
All right.
So,
awesome. So yes, when you hear snoring, it's Willow. She's sleeping, and I'm grateful that she's sleeping right now.
Well, so you do all of this rebellious living. You get sent to military school. We won't even delve into what got you sent there, but you end up making something, and I don't, mean to disparage people who don't go out and get their doctorates, but you end up making something of yourself by going into psychology and, doing therapy and therapeutic counseling, and you find yourself as, not the quintessential stuffed shirt type guy or counselor or therapist or psychologist who people would normally imagine sitting, somewhere with a pipe in their mouth and saying, "Please tell me about your childhood and how your mother hurt you," and then end up stepping into working with both sides of the criminal justice system, law enforcement and corrections and detention staff, as well as working with inmates and detainees. Was that something that you had planned and something that you said, I really want to do this, or was that kind of like it fell into your lap and it just worked? And by the way, thanks for working with the military community as a veteran myself, 82nd Airborne. And we are well aware of just how much help the survivors of the last 20 years of war really need, and that they're not really getting, especially from the VA. So thanks for doing that. But how did you fall into working with law enforcement, working with corrections, working with um, convicts, because that's
Yeah,
just not normal.
so I think that for me, like everyone has different perspectives and beliefs, and I respect all of them. For me, I kind of buy into the idea that things happen for a reason. That tends to resonate with me, and so I think that I think one thing led to another in the course of my life. One of them was that I was able to go in and so I was out west. I was a tenured professor at the University of Nevada in Reno. And while I was out there, I had a student who was working at a women's center where they would run these domestic violence anger management groups for men who were convicted of violent crimes. And so she heard me talk about yield theory and my perspective that has nothing to do with judgment and everything to do with how we can learn from this moment forward. And so she said, I would love for you to come up and see this. So I did some undercover stuff at first. I just went up, sat there in my t-shirt and jeans. Guys assumed I was one of them. I was able to observe and see what was really going on. So for me, it's never been about what do we need to, people want to just put on this persona or mask for the world. So I wanted to know what's really going on. So I remember my initial experience where I sat in this group and the guys thought I was just there because I was one of them. And I listened to the teacher. He was super pejorative, condescending. He was like, some of you are psychopaths. You're never going to change. So I'm thinking, man, if I'm
That's a great anger management class right there.
Yeah, I'm thinking, why would I want to change if you're telling me this? If this is what and then they had this thing, and it was called the Duluth model, and I think it might have even been you're from Minnesota. I think it might even be in that area. But this Duluth model was they would have to write this letter of accountability, and that would demonstrate that they were accountable for their actions. Well, after 52 weeks of mandatory anger management, these guys would write this letter of accountability. Well, one guy was getting ready to graduate on the very first night that I came in and was observing. And so I was back there with the guys, and they thought I was one of them. And so they were like, hey, man, erase this, write this, do this. And I was like, wait, so you don't actually know any of this yourself. You're relying on these guys to tell you what to say to be accountable. And so he did that. He erased stuff. He put whatever they told him to put in. He turned in the letter. The teacher then read it and goes, wow, this looks like you're really accountable. He didn't know any of this stuff. The guys wrote it for him. I was in the group watching that happen. So then he was like, okay, great job. You're good. So when I left, what I realized was this on both ends for both of them, it was, if I'm in a group and I'm being told I'm a psychopath, I'm never going to change, why would I want to change? And conversely, if I don't have to actually be accountable because I just say whatever the system tells me I'm
Just say the right stuff, yeah.
Right. So then I thought there needs to be change on both ends. So what I did was I did some studies where we took my approach, yield theory, against this other approach that they were doing. And we saw that there was an impact. There was a big impact. So then I co-founded a center for people convicted of violent crimes in South Lake Tahoe, California. We would have guys who would do their mandatory 52 weeks. They would get off of probation, and they would come back voluntarily to the group, and judges, lawyers, people never saw anything like it. So I was like, listen, my door's open. If I'm paid to teach, come watch what we're doing. We're talking about human behavior. So people would come in and they'd see it, but really ultimately what I talked about was life, like life. We don't get told how to handle life. How do we handle stress? We have classes on math and science, all these cool, wonderful things, but we really don't get educated.
Is math really cool? I mean, is it? Math is not really cool, Dr. Conte.
So I would have said no. And then our daughter is majoring in physics right now, and she's crushing it. So she has she has a different perspective, a phenomenal perspective. But yeah, so I think she sees it in a different way. But yeah,
she's
so anyway,
smart. She's smart. Like, dumb guys like me do not like math.
Right. I mean, listen, I never liked calculus. When I got to calculus, I thought that was the one thing I struggled with. And she crushed it. She crushed her first semester, calculus and physics and all that stuff. Anyway, the point is this: we don't really learn classes on life. How do we handle life? How do we handle relationships? How do we handle stress? And we're often
we only
told,
learn what we're immersed in when it comes to relationships and handling those things. So if you're immersed in a culture or a society or a community that squashes it all down and you just tamp it down for your whole life, then that's all you're going to do. No one's, for the most part, is going to step in and go, oh, here's how you really respond to this.
right, not until you get in trouble.
Right.
So yeah, so that's how I kind of got involved. I did that stuff out west for a long time. I loved it. And when I moved back to Pennsylvania, I kind of in 2012 came back to Pennsylvania. I sat down with the Secretary of Corrections at the time. I told him what I was doing out west, what I wanted to bring to Pennsylvania, and he loved what I was saying. But he said, "Listen, I'm data driven, so I got to put you with literally our most violent incarcerated individuals. And if you can make a difference with them, we'll take it throughout the state." And so I was able to. I never touched the data. And I think that's important because I was in the world of the academic institutions where people skew their data left and right. That's a reality. So I never touched the data. And we saw with yield theory a statistically significant reduction in violent outbursts. And so
and you're talking about a violent population, just so
violent
people know.
Literally, people classify as the most violent,
Yeah.
Not just in the state of Pennsylvania, but let's be real, throughout the country. I mean, these are people who did awful. I don't deal with people in prisons who might have been locked up inappropriately. We're talking about people who, by the time they get to me, are wanting to disclose and get rid of all that stuff. So people who are serial murderers, rapists, people who've done horrific things, unspeakable things to others. So when we're talking about this population, and so I spent 10, 11 years in Pennsylvania working with both the officers and the incarcerated population, because I believe it needs to change on all fronts. Look, we can all change. We can all improve. So my tagline, my funny tagline, it's humorous, but it's true, is that the world boils down to two kinds of people. There are people who have issues and dead people. So that's it.
Well, it's funny, but yes, it is. It's very true. We all have issues or we're dead. And sometimes our issues help us with the latter part of that. So, just so for the audience, we've both mentioned yield theory a few times now. Give everybody kind of the 1,000-foot layman's view of what yield theory is and a little bit of how you developed it.
Okay, so it sounds fancy. What is yield theory? Anytime you hear theory, here's the deal. Think about this. If you've ever tried to talk to someone who was really defensive, maybe they're angry, maybe they just don't want to change, they're defensive. The question is, how do you get around that defensiveness? How can you speak in ways that can be heard, regardless of the emotions that are flying? And so what yield theory is it's an approach to communication that's based on meeting people where they actually are, not just where you think they should be in that moment, but where they actually are, getting around their fight or flight response and speaking in ways that can be heard, regardless of the intensity of the emotions being experienced. So that's what it is. I tell people, like, one of the ways I do it in my trainings is this. I show a picture of a giant grizzly bear. And I say, if a bear walked in the room right now, your brain is going to do one of three things. It's either going to fight the bear. Who are we kidding? We're not fighting that bear. It's either going to freeze, or we're going to flee. We're going to run from the bear. Fight, flight, or freeze response. Now, this is cool about the time we live in right now, in 2023. As sure as we will either fight, freeze, or flee from that bear, as sure as that bear can trigger that in us, that same part of our brain is equally triggered when someone challenges our egos. So imagine your loved one says, "Hey, we need to talk." Wait, what do you mean we need to talk? What's about? And so you immediately get angry, and it's fight, flight, or freeze response. So when the ego, as equally as we would defend our bodies, we will defend our egos. And so
Sometimes
what I do
more.
is more, absolutely. So what I do is I help people understand, how do we get around that? How do we get around the ego? How do we communicate regardless of the intensity of the emotions that are being experienced? That's what yield theory really is.
You told a story, and I can't remember if you talked about it in the book. And by the way, did you narrate your own book?
I did, yes.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Um, yeah, folks, I read by listening to other people read to me. 8 hours a day during work. Oh, that's all I'm doing is listening to lectures and
Smart. Smart. You're able to take in I love audiobooks. I grew up with books on records. That'll tell you how old I am. And then I got into books on tapes. And so I feel very grateful to my parents. My mom was an English teacher. My dad was actually a professor of literature before he switched to earth science. So really, I come from a household with intellectual giants. They definitely pushed me to read as much as I could when I was young. But I am so incredibly grateful to my mom for telling me stories when I was a little kid every night, because I teach through storytelling. To this
Yeah.
day, I tell Zen tells. If you read any of my work, I teach through storytelling. But I'm really grateful because she would also have me listen to books on tape. And so I've done that for my own daughter. Like, I make sure she learned that growing up. She listened, because that's a wonderful skill.
It's not cheating either.
It's not cheating. You're getting the information. Some people are auditory learners.
Yeah. There's people are like, that's cheating. And I'm like, no, it's reading. it's
silly to think that there's a cheating. You're gaining information. How do you gain that information? So I have my book. But it's also available on Audible for sure. And I do read that, definitely.
Yeah, you did. So, and I know you talked about it when you sat down with Jake and crew on Guns and Mental Health, and I can't remember if you made reference to it in your book or not. But you told a story of an incredibly violent situation where there was a death, and you stepped into that with an inmate, and were able to kind of circumvent that and really walk him back. Do you remember the story I'm talking about?
I mean, I've done that so many times. I would know which one you're talking about.
Well, give us give us a story about
the person had in where he was going through a death, where he killed somebody.
Yes.
Which one? Like, what would it be? Which one would it be?
I don't remember the exact scenario.
But no, I appreciate the stuff stood out to you. There's so many different things. Tell me the concept that you want to go with, and
he was real. Shock of all shocks. He was like, "You're not coming in here to help me. You're just trying to get me to confess." And
oh, you know what? I've had that happen a lot of times. So one of the things that happens is, if I go in, I don't know which one that particular one was, but one of the ones that comes to mind immediately was I went into there was an inmate who was really defensive and angry and struggling. So I walk into this prison, and typically through the years, this is not once or twice, this happens all the time. I go into a prison, and if there are officers or staff members there who are jaded or frustrated, then here I come, and they go, "Oh, here's this doctor. Let's see what this doctor can do." So they would always take me over to the worst case scenario. One time I got taken over, the one that's coming to mind in this moment was the time when there was a guy in the medical unit, and he was out of control. So when I walked over, he actually knew who I was, because my videos are played in many different institutions. So he started off with, "I know you're not going to try to calm me down. No, they're going to bring in the de-escalation guy to calm me down. Like, that's not going to happen. You're never going to calm me down." I said, "My man, I don't even know what they want from me over here. Don't even worry about it. I'm not trying to calm you down. I don't even know what they want. They literally sent me over here. Like, I have no idea what they want from me." He was like, "That's how they are." And I was like, "Really? Is that how they are?" He was like, "Yeah, they're like this and like that." And so, like, I kind of just joined with him, merged with him. And I was like, "So they're like what?" And so he's telling me about it. So he's calming down. He's just telling me all about them. And then I was like, "Yeah, I don't know why they want me to calm you down. Like, I don't know idea what's going on with them." And so I kind of merged with him. Essentially, if you consider in martial arts the push-pull principle. So if somebody pushes you, instead of pushing back, you pull. If somebody pushes, you pull. If somebody pulls, you push. So the smallest person in terms of martial arts can move the biggest person because the person's actually moving him or herself. Now, psychologically, I do the same thing. You're never going to calm me down. You're right. I'm not going to calm you down. They push, I'm going to pull. And so, yeah, to be able to, instead of trying to tell people this is what's going to happen, my job is to meet people where they actually are and acknowledge it. So I spent a career based on being around people who were mandated to see me. I remember the first time I walked into a teenager's home, I was doing in-home therapy. And he was like, F you, I'm not talking to you. He goes running out the door. I remember the mom saying, don't you leave the house. Don't you leave the house, boy. And the door slammed shut. She's like, be back by 10. Like, I come back the next week and I said, whatever happened to that? She said, he didn't get back till midnight. I said, what'd you do? She said, well, he was hungry. I made him a pizza. So you understand enabling.
Yeah. Well, and we wonder where those problems started.
But I see. So my job, and that's probably not the story you're looking for. We'll get to it. We'll get to different ones. But my point is this: when I'm pulled into a situation and people say you need to calm this person down, like, I'm not a miracle worker. What I do is I will look at the world through that person's eyes. I will genuinely try to remove judgment and see what the person's going through. And sometimes it's easy. Like, I can imagine it's easy for the people who are listening to say, okay, if you feel bad for someone, you can put yourself behind their eyes. But I do that with people who are coming at me and angry with me. Like, I still say, like, I imagine, like, for instance, for the guys who came to my anger management groups, they already spent time in prison or jail, and now they have to pay out of pocket because they're mandated to come to an anger management group. So I would put myself behind their eyes and be like, yeah, if I'm in your shoes,
that's going to make me angry.
Of course.
Yeah.
So no judgment. Like, to be able to step outside of yourself is a key. And that's difficult for people to do. You and I were talking about at the before this show started, we're talking about this concept of hypocrisy. Hypocrisy gets to people. It gets to people. Wherever I go and I start talking about, I ask people, how many of you are frustrated by hypocrisy? And 100% of the hands go up. People don't like being told, do what I say, don't do what I do. And I get that. Hypocrisy sucks to be around. But what we fail to realize is our own hypocrisy, the ways in which we're doing the very same things we don't want other people to do. And so, there's a great story that I think is relevant in this moment. There was a monk, and he carried a mirror with him everywhere he went. And there was this woman, she came up to him and she said, I've been watching you and you're kind of full of yourself. And the monk's like, well, why is that? She said, well, I watch you and you check yourself out in that mirror all the time. And the monk, he pulls up this mirror and he looks at it. He said, oh, this. He said, oh, yeah, I carry this with me everywhere I go, because every time I encounter problems, I remind myself that I am both the source and the solution to my problems. I am the source and the solution to my problems. We create problems for ourselves, but we also can solve problems for ourselves. We have a tendency to believe that it's the outside world that's causing us to be the way we are, or that their problems are awful, but ours are not that big of a deal. So listen to this statement. First, I hope that story resonates with you and with your audience. But the other aspect is this. This is powerful. We have a tendency to minimize the harm we cause others, but amplify the harm they cause us. And the funnest, probably the easiest way to describe it is through road rage. If you're driving down the road and you cut someone off and they get really angry, you say, chill out. What's the big deal? I just made a little mistake. But heaven help them if they cut you off, because all of a sudden it's a really big deal. Not sure if all that stuff resonates.
No, it actually, to be honest with you, it's kind of a natural segue for where, I told you I wanted to go with this conversation. And you had mentioned ego and how the natural human response to an assault on your ego is to get defensive, to defend your ego. That's what your ego wants. Your ego wants to be defended, and it not only doesn't want to be defended, it doesn't want to ever be offended. It doesn't. It just like, you can't offend me. You don't get to offend me. It's and
That's it.
and I used to say I spent over half of my career as a detention deputy, as a field training officer. So I was responsible for bringing, like, this raw meat and molding it and shaping it into someone who could go home safe, at the very least, at the end of the day, which wasn't always easy. And I would, the very first day that I would meet my new hires, and I always got picked, in particular, by a friend of mine who was the sergeant in charge of the training division. He gave me the hard cases. He would observe them during academy and then go, "Yeah, guess who we're assigning him to or her to," And then I'd get the call, "Hey, I need you to come to the office," and I'd be like, "Oh, good God." But I would tell these new hires, these new deputies, who were, go-getters, they're coming out of law enforcement school. In Minnesota, we don't have an academy per se. It's all done through colleges and skills training, and it's taught by, veteran law enforcement and whatnot. I would tell these new deputies, I'm like, no matter how bad your day started when you got out of bed this morning to come to work, the person that you're probably going to have the biggest conflict with today is literally probably having the worst day of their life in a situation where they have absolutely no control.
Mm-hmm.
You have the worst day of your life. You could pick up the phone and call and say, "I can't come to work today."
Mm-hmm.
This person is having the worst day of their life, and they don't get to phone that in.
Yep.
And you have to recognize that early on in your career, or you are never going to be able to do this job, because you're going to lose the ability to have empathy. You're going to lose the ability to have any kind of sympathetic response to what it is they're going through.
So one of the reasons why you were so good, I can tell as you're speaking, is your empathy. That's one of the reasons why they wanted you to come in and talk to somebody. I mean, that's evident as soon as you started speaking. Like that was a key. Most people have to return it back to themselves. You're suffering, but I was suffering worse. Oh, you're suffering, but let me tell you about a time I was suffering. It has no relevance with it. Can you sit with someone who's suffering and just talk about their suffering and not bring it back to you at all? And I tell me if I'm off, but I bet that's what people saw in you, is that you were willing to actually focus on the other person.
I hope that's true. I'm no good at you talk to Jake offline about my self-deprivation or self-degradation. I'm like, I am no good at identifying my positive aspects until you offend my ego. But what I frequently saw, Dr. Conte, was and I mentioned it in the opening before I brought you in, that there's a really thin line, and I'm not talking about a thin blue line. There is that line is not thin, by the way, at all. There is a very thin line of delineation between the criminal mindset and the law enforcement mindset, and it is all very much ego driven.
Sure.
And you take one side of that equation, the side that is, charged with protecting and serving, keeping people safe, keeping their team safe, keeping, the criminals on the street safe from each other, keeping incarcerated criminals safe from each other, from themselves sometimes. And that line over here, the law enforcement career field, the law enforcement world, their egos are fed every day in their shift briefings. And you are the badasses, you are the warriors, you are the soldiers of the city, you're the soldiers of the county, you're the soldiers of the state, that you are out there, you are fighting this fight, you are the most important person in this scenario at all times, and you have to be the authority, you have to be in charge, because if you're not in charge, then there's going to be chaos, and if there's chaos, there's it's
Sure.
the facility is going to riot. There's going to be blood in the streets. And what I see, and what I observed, and what I continue to observe and see, now looking at it from the outside, is how much of an ego boost that is, and where I see problems arising. And if in perhaps your observations are slightly different, maybe they're not. Is that you get this ego stroking so much that when you now take that aspect, the side that has the badge, the side that wears the uniform, and you thrust them into a world of big ego, and those egos collide, that leads to the chaos, because you have these two immovable objects that are ego driven, that do not want to yield. They will not yield.
Mhm. I think you're right on the money. I think you're right on the money exactly with that. Like, ego causes so much conflict. And when your ego is fed too much and you're not able to step outside, listen, one way I start every talk is I ask people, how many of you believe as long as you're alive, you still have more to learn? And 100% of the hands go up. Wherever I go, 100% of the hands go up. So then I ask this, why is it that if you really believe, so none of you, I already asked, by the way, do you all like hypocrisy? And they all 100%, nobody likes it. So you don't like hypocrisy, right? And you all believe that as long as you're alive, you still have more to learn. So why is it that the moment someone disagrees with you, why is it you get defensive and defend your position? If you really believe you have more to learn, why, and you don't like hypocrisy, then why not lead by going, well, teach me what you're seeing that I might not be seeing? And when it comes to like ego versus ego, I think you phrased that really, really well. That's exactly what happens. If someone's ego is fed, you're good at this. It's the skill is discernment. And this might be a nuanced conversation, but this is true. The skill is discernment. So can you discern the difference between, you might be the heartbeat of the city, but if you're wrong in a particular moment, can you understand that you're wrong about that moment, not wrong about everything you are, not changing your definition of what you do, but just in that particular moment? So I have a really effective way, I think, of teaching that.
So you were on a thought and had to take a quick step away. So take us back to where your mind was after, when we were talking about egos and how egos were meeting up with one another and all of that.
So we talked about discernment and this concept of discernment. How do you differentiate between the things that you're zeroing in on and something else? Okay, so here's one of the best ways that I like to teach this. When our daughter was 8 years old, she's 18 now, so you got to go back in time in your mind and picture this. But when she was 8 years old, she wanted to play basketball. So what I did was this. I took her out to the driveway and I said, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to show you how to shoot a foul shot. So your toe, your knee, your elbow, and your finger are all going to line up. They're all going to be in a straight line. Toe, knee, elbow, finger. We're going to shoot and snap the wrist. Okay, toe, knee, elbow, finger, snap the wrist. So here's what we're going to do. I'm going to shoot. So after I explained it, took my time, toe, knee, elbow, finger, straight line, snap the wrist. Now I'm going to shoot, and I want you to give me feedback. So the first thing I did was I threw my elbow out, way out to the side, and I shot. And she said, well, your elbow was out to the side. And I was like, oh, you hate me. You think I'm terrible. You think I'm the worst father in the whole world. I can't believe this. You think I'm terrible. And she was like, no. And I was like, what are you saying? And she was like, I was just saying that your elbow was out. And I was like, oh, okay. Well, let me try it again. And this time I threw my foot way out to the side. And I shot. And I looked at her and she said, your foot was out. And then I threw myself on the ground this time. I was like, you don't believe in me. You think I'll never make it at anything in life. You think I'm the worst person in the world. She was like, no. And I was like, what are you saying? And she said, I was just saying your foot was out. And I said, okay, so look me in the eyes. You are my favorite person on planet Earth. I love you more than life itself. Anytime I give you feedback about your performance for the rest of your life, I want you to understand I am only giving you feedback about what I'm watching in that particular moment, not about you, not about what my belief in you or anything else. And from that moment forward, I was always able to give her very direct feedback, and she never took it personally. I could say to her when she was playing tennis in high school, "Hey, how lazy were your feet on that?" And I'm sure I sounded like a mean father to other people. And she was like, "Yeah, you're right. My feet were super lazy on that." And so I helped her understand that feedback about,
People are listening, going, "What just happened here?"
yeah,
there was no
yeah,
meltdown.
right. And what I taught her was this: feedback about your performance is not feedback about who you are.
Mm,
And I do the same thing. I work with some of the best athletes in the world. I work with really top-notch coaches and teams in college basketball, college football. And I remember one time I was working with a big-time college basketball program. I'm still working with them, so I'm not going to say who it is, but the coach was having difficulty giving feedback to his players because he said they seem to get so upset if I say anything. So I had a water bottle. I got a Synergy bottle we use for this. But I said, I grabbed a water bottle at the time and I said, "Coach, what I want you to do is invite them into your office and do this. Say this bottle represents your basketball skills. And here's what's going to happen. I need you to understand I brought you here because I love you. I believe in you. You have my full support. I think the world of you. What we're going to do in this particular meeting, we're just going to talk about these basketball skills. That's it. We're just going to talk about this. That's it." And so he was able to set that off to the side, talk to them about their basketball skills, and they were actually able to receive the information. So I remember him texting me late at night. I go to bed early, so I didn't get it until next day. But he's like, this was so helpful. They actually heard everything I had to say. So what I do is this: yield theory is predicated on its three core actions, and that's it. It's really listen, validate, explore options. But those three foundational core actions are based on 7 fundamental components, one of which is called non-attachment. Now, all this stuff sounds fancy, but here's the idea behind it. Non-attachment essentially means that as much as you know, you're not your jewelry. I'm not my hat. If I lose my hat, that doesn't make me less of a person, right? That's silly. But I'm also not my ideas. So if I have an idea and it ends up being something I don't stick with down the road, that doesn't make me less of a person. So
right.
we know we're not our things, but do we really understand that we're also not our ideas as well? Well, when you can learn this concept, then, for example, you could look at me and say, "Hey, Doc, I don't agree with any of this yield theory stuff." And I go, "Okay, cool. That doesn't mean you think less of who I am as an individual. You just don't agree with these particular thoughts." And to be able to discern that difference between who you are and what your thoughts are, between who you are and what your performance is, well, that's the key to becoming successful yourself and maximizing your own potential. But it's also the key in regard to giving people feedback. So now let's tie this all back in to what you were talking about in terms of people in law enforcement. If you were able to come in and give someone feedback about something they did in terms of the arrest or the interaction, and if they're able to understand that your feedback about that moment, like game film, sports psychology, game film, if your lineman blocked left when the play called for him to block right, and you give him that feedback, you're not saying he's a terrible person. You're not saying that he's awful. You're saying you blocked left when you were supposed to block right. That's it. Now, in that same way, if we can give people in law enforcement, in corrections, feedback and say, "Look, when you did this particular thing, that was ineffective." That doesn't mean you're ineffective. It doesn't mean
Right.
you're terrible and wrong and bad. It simply means that moment was ineffective. And that's what I do. That's what I train people on how to do, how to give feedback, how to take feedback. But honestly, if I put it in a nutshell, that's what I do.
I think too that one of the biggest problems that we have as a culture, as a society, let's just say what with the Western European mentality, especially here in the United States, is so much of who we are as people is linked to what we do. It, when you're introduced to someone for the first time, you're meeting them at a dinner party or a function or something, and they'll, hey, I'm so and so and I work for such and such.
Sure.
And so everything about them is tied to, and I think I'm perhaps maybe not you or some others, but I think we all kind of struggle with this. My being, my essence, my value is tied up in my functioning in society based on my career or the work that I do. And so then when you do approach someone and you give them a critique of something that they're doing, especially as it's related to their work, you are, in their minds, you are actually attacking them because, as you said, they're attached to that. They're so intrinsically attached to it that they cannot differentiate their personhood from the work that they do. And I see this over and over again in the law enforcement world and the law enforcement career field, that it even so much as, we have some stores in our area, several now, that offer hero parking. And, so you get people with handicap stickers on their cars, and people who work in law enforcement, firefighters, veterans, and whatnot get the prime parking spots in at a grocery store. And when you think about it, it's a stroking of the ego in that situation. And my first time encountering one of these parking spots, before I really started to kind of have this sea change in my own life, was, yeah, I earned that. I earned that spot. I wasn't working. I wasn't, I was shopping. And here I am going, I deserve that parking spot because I'm a veteran and I work in the law enforcement world. And God dog it, I'm taking it. And that's kind of one of those moments where I had some cognitive dissonance, because I was like, I kind of realized what just happened, but I wasn't going to stop taking the prime parking spot, And so as you have worked with law enforcement and you've worked with corrections, and you've related multiple stories about this as well, the same response that you get from inmates about how you're not changing me and you're not going to, talk me down, you get a lot of the same responses from cops and from detention officers and correctional officers. Sure. Because you do address them as individuals and in groups in different environments. And which one is more standoffish, the inmates or the cops, when you go to address them first?
It's individuals. It's up to the people who are in front of me. Sometimes people are open to learning, and sometimes people are not. I think that it makes sense why people want to have a general answer for, like, and put people in boxes. Hey, cops don't do this, inmates don't do this. But at the end of the day, it really is two kinds of people with issues and dead people. So
right.
It depends on the person's readiness, willingness, and ability to change. And sometimes you have a group of people who they're more inclined to be ready, willing, and able to change. And sometimes you have a group of people who say, no, it's not on us to change. I remember one time I was in one of Georgia's maximum security prisons, and I was going unit to unit, and I was talking to people. I was working with the officers and inmates, and I got to this one restricted housing unit, which people in general would know as the Hull. Mm-hmm. And so they're in this restricted housing unit. We brought 10 guys into this smaller space, and I spoke to them for about 45 minutes. Now, I went to each person at the end, and I did the same thing I did with people in my graduate classes, whether they were master's students or doctoral students. I would ask people at the end of every class, what are you taking away from today? Because I always wanted to know, listen, I just taught you, just paid for a class. What are you taking away? I do that at the end of every counseling session. So I asked these inmates, what are you taking away from this past 45 minutes that I'm sitting here talking to you? And so the first 9 people were like, oh, I'm taking this, I'm taking this, I'm taking this. I get to the 10th person, he's like, nothing. And I said, okay, cool. What's not resonating? What do we talk about that's not resonating with you? He's like, it's not that. Is that you need to be telling all this to the COs. And I said, I appreciate that, my man. But do you know that the COs that you want to be hearing this? Well, they answered the same way you did. And even a guy in a restricted housing unit in a maximum security prison was like, oh, damn, like you're right. Like if I'm closed-minded, then the people I want to be changing, they're also closed-minded. So if he could get it, that's where I get fired up. I'm like, if he can understand that, anybody can understand this. That
Right.
if you're not open to changing, like one of the things I said, so I see Twitter's flash on the bottom of the screen as we're speaking. I use Twitter. I have for a decade, where I wake up every morning and I meditate. I visualize standing in front of the entire world, and Twitter just happens to be the platform that I use. And I say one statement where I think, if I was going to speak and the entire world was listening, what might I say? And I share that statement every day. And what I see is this: like, if you're going to stand in front of the whole world and speak, if there's an issue that goes across all human beings, one of them is hypocrisy. Like, people want so badly for other people to get it, but they're so unwilling to look at themselves. And it's hard. It's hard to be that monk in the mirror. It's hard to look inward and say, well, wait a minute, maybe I'm doing this too. Because again, we minimize the pain we cause others, but we amplify or maximize the pain they cause us. And we think it's okay. So most people play the yes, but game. Yes, I know all this stuff. Yes, you're right. Yes, but, and now they give themselves a reason for why they don't have to do it. Listen, none of this is easy. I don't think it's easy, but it is possible. It's possible. That's why what you're doing is wonderful work, shining light for people to gain personal growth. That's what this is all about. Really, it's about shining light and having personal growth.
I appreciate the way you said that. Sometimes I wonder. Sometimes I think it's just a really low candle with a wood wick in a really black room. Sometimes, but I wish I could get people to understand in that what you're talking about isn't easy, because that's what everybody wants. Is they want this fix.
Mhm.
They, you've got one side, and let's just break it down with the back the blue at the all cost side of the equation, and the all cops are bastards side of the equation. They all think that their solution is the best, and it's going to be easy. That it really is going to be easy. If we would just do this one thing, this would fix it all. And when you step into the morass of the problem with a system that is corrupt, because people are corrupt. They just are. People, and I don't mean that in a deeply theologically spiritual way, philosophically. It's just, when we touch things, we bring damage to those things. And when you have a bunch of people with a bunch of different perspectives trying to all work on something, very rarely do you come to a resolution that just fixes it overnight, because everybody is putting their hands on a damaged system, trying to pull out the piece that they think needs to be pulled out, as opposed to addressing the totality of the problem. And so you have the one side that doesn't think law enforcement needs any reform at all, and that every cop is actually a hero, and that they deserve to be applauded at all costs, and they never do anything wrong. And then you got the other side that can literally watch a cop rescue somebody from a burning building or from a drowning in an ice-covered lake, and still try to come up with a situation where the cop actually threw the guy in the lake.
Sure.
and they're all pulling at each other, and instead of doing what you're saying, which is to look at the situation and say, okay, what's actually happening here? And
so the fancy term for what you're talking about, Carl Jung coined a term called enantiodromia. I talk about it in Walking Through Anger.
Say that again.
Enantiodromia. So en, which means with, anti means opposite, anti.
Yeah.
Dromedary, walking. So the word literally means walking in the opposite direction. So we have a tendency to go from one extreme to the other.
Yep.
So either you're a hug a thug or you want to lock them up and throw away the key. Either you're everything the blue does is right or everything the blue does is wrong. And so that extreme thinking it's not even juvenile. It's toddlerish. Think about it. When you're a child, all you can think about is good and bad, right and wrong, and brain development backs that up. When you're young, you can only think in terms of good and bad, right and wrong. When you get older, you understand the gray, you understand the middle ground. But for many people, and for society as a whole, so society develops more slowly than individual development. So, for example, whereas an individual can understand as a toddler, you're either a good guy or a bad guy. And then when you get older, you recognize, well, wait a minute, there might have been a reason why this person did this thing. Doesn't mean to make it right or wrong. It just means there might have been a reason. And then we get a bunch of gray. But when you're a society, you're developing so much more slowly that you throw out these, it's all this or all that. So, how do you differentiate between society's view on an issue or your own individual perspective on it? And the way I would help people understand this concept is through what I just call a box. People call it the Conte box, but I just say it as a box. And essentially, it's this: if you stand in front of a box, you're only ever going to be able to see one to two sides of the box in a given moment. That's just human nature. Now, your ego is going to want to tell you that you've been all around that box. You know every side of that box. But the reality is that for me, in this whole concept of the box represents the human psyche. And so if you really believe that you've been all around the box, that means you believe that you are omniscient because the box represents the human psyche. So that means you know what everyone's thinking and you know all things of all people. And that's silly. That's a bit delusional to think that. So let's come back to the more accurate reality, which is in any given moment, you can only see one to two sides of a box, which means your perspective is inherently limited. So if you really want to understand, that means you have to let go that you might not have all the answers and your perspective might not be definitive, and that there might be a perspective that sees a bit more than yours does in that current moment. But let's come back to the elbow out in that teaching exercise. That's my dog squeaking her toy there.
I love it. That's the best part of the show today.
She's awesome. I'll try to get her face on here, but I'm afraid of pulling her up because I don't want her leg to be hurt.
No, yeah, don't. Let's not hurt the pooch.
Yeah. But let's so we come back to this concept of discernment, which is
Yeah.
can we discern that if feedback about a particular issue? So maybe through politicians, that's an easy way to see it. So politicians will be like, "Hey, what do you think about this issue?" Well, I think puppies are cute. Wait, what? You're just ignoring the question. Like you're not actually talking about what you're talking about.
You definitely know politicians very well.
Yeah, yeah. So they're just talking about this. So they do what's called in a philosophical fallacy. It's called ignoring the question. You're not actually talking about what you're talking about. So, what if you were able to in your life talk about what you're talking about? So, if someone gives you feedback that what you're doing is not effective, instead of you getting defensive and talking about all the things that are effective that you do, what if you just acknowledge what they're actually talking about? Hey, doc, you're not really good at doing this one thing. Yeah, well, I'm Dr. Conte and I've done this, and that. Wait a minute. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about this one thing. What if I was able to instead, when somebody says, "Hey, doc, you're not good at this," I go, "You know what? You're right. I'm not as effective as that as I would like to be, and I'll work on that." What a difference. And when you see people respond like that, you tend to admire it. But why not do that for yourself? When people give you feedback about what you do, don't take it as if it's feedback about who you are. And if each of us can work on that, could you imagine that little dimly lit candle that you were talking about might start to spread exponentially?
Do you, you know, we look, I'm trying not to, once again, I've had people on, where we have talked about the need for reform in law enforcement, and we have, solutions and theories of what solutions should be. And you mentioned liberty and freedom and how much you love those things, and I'm I'm working on some stuff to try and advance it. When it comes to constitutional continuing education for law enforcement and whatnot. But one of the other places that I think a lot of the continuing education is in communication, and you see it some in corrections, and you see it a little bit in law enforcement to a lesser degree when you talk about interpersonal communications. But how beneficial do you think it would be to agencies across the United States if they were to bring in somebody like you? Obviously you can't be, everywhere for everyone all the time, but if they were able to bring in somebody like you who could take something like yield theory, or to actually take yield theory into a continuing education environment and say, hey, for this class today, we're not gonna do role playing. We're just gonna talk about putting yourself in the other person's shoes and getting that, you know, yeah. Granted, the guy right ahead of you, he just walked out of the store with the flat, after doing a flash mob robbery, and this just happens to be the thug that you caught. But instead of yelling and screaming at him, talk to him like a human being.
Yeah,
That how important would that be, and how much of a positive impact do you think that would have
it
on
would change.
policing in the United States?
I believe it would change everything. Honestly, believe it would change everything. I think that's what I try to strive to teach
She's
the.
adorable, by the way.
Thank you. She's so cute. I love her so much. I think it would change everything. I think if we could look at people and see, people get so angry at other, it's really kind of, it's sad, but in the world today, people will pull up stuff people said 10 years ago or
Yeah.
5 years ago or 20 years ago, and then they just want to condemn someone on that. Like, who amongst us hasn't messed up? Who amongst us hasn't said something that we wouldn't want to be defined by? So I say this all the time. I say this on my Twitter a lot. Like, if you don't want to be defined by your worst moment,
Right.
and stop defining other people by their
By
worst
their
moment.
worst moment. Yep.
Yeah, and
Absolutely.
it's and people are so quick to say yes, but, and then they still go on and define people by their worst moments. If you want to freeze someone in a moment of time where they made a mistake and they didn't say something in the most effective way, then you better be prepared to be frozen in time in your worst moment too. And it's probably something you're not even thinking about right now. It's probably a mistake that you're like, no, I didn't even mean that. Yeah, right. But so did the person that you're condemning or freezing in that moment. They might not have meant it either. This is not easy work, but if you really want to condemn others, be mindful, because I'm not sure. And that's why I love, so I'm a practicing Zen Buddhist, but I love the statement that Jesus said, where he was like, listen, he drew a line in the sand. He was like, anybody who hasn't sinned, you go ahead and cast the first stone. They were going to stone somebody or whatever. And this is such a great story, because he's basically calling them on, like, look, if you think that you are without sin, my goodness, go ahead and toss that stone. But nobody does, because people are with sin. We all make, and sin is an archery term. It actually means missing the mark.
Mm-hmm.
And we miss the mark all the time. So it's a pretty common thing, whether it's a spiritual thing, religious thing, or just a secular understanding of the concept. It's missing
That's
the
right.
mark. It's missing the mark.
And
And
the
we,
beautiful thing about that story that you're telling too was the fact that they had the people who he used that on orchestrated and set up that entire thing to try and catch him, and, and like it's so and he just and he meant it too. People coming from a very reformed Calvinistic Christian philosophical perspective, people will very often go, he didn't actually mean it. And I'm like, no, he meant it. He really did. He was really saying, if you really do believe that you are without sin in this situation, cast the first stone. And
sure.
the way the story is related is they just all kind of, you could just see him one by one just drop the rocks and turn around and walk away. what we miss is then he also turned to the woman and said, now go and sin no more. And that's what, it's what I love about you bringing that story up, is that here you have this perfect, especially from Christian philosophical perspective, you have the perfect Son of God standing there in the middle, interceding for both halves, but also holding them all equally accountable.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we don't do in our society today. We very rarely will hold both sides equally accountable for what's going on. Here's a perfect example, and I'm sure you've probably not noticed anything since October 7th of 2023. Like there may or may not be a conflict in the Middle East happening right now. But you've got one side who are, the nation state of Israel are all bastards. They're all evil people, and they're all committing genocide. And then you got the other side who are like, no, they're not. And the people of Gaza are all bastards, monsters, and worthless, and they deserve everything they're getting. And then you've got a very small segment of society standing there in the middle going, they're both doing wrong. They're both. And boy, the reactions that you get from people when you watch this conversation take place, it's like you're hitting against their egos. Like they're so invested in that argument.
It is, but think about here's where you can get in depth. So I think people have taken sometimes the lessons that I teach and skewed them a bit. And here's what I mean. Yes, everyone plays a role in every interaction. That's a fact. Everyone's accountable for the part they play.
That's
But
right.
absolutely, there is sometimes something that is done that is more wrong. Sometimes there is something that is absolutely
Sure.
the wrong
Absolutely.
side. So the best way to explain this is through domestic violence. Is it possible that two people play a role in that interaction? Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Both people play a role, but the moment the person does something to physically hurt the other person, that person's wrong. There's no account.
That's right.
Like I say to men all the time, like there's no reason, you don't ever get to have a moment where you're like, well, this is the reason why. Okay, great. There's a reason why you can't hurt somebody. That's, to me, it's never acceptable for a man to hurt a woman. And
That's right.
and it's black and white. And so, yes, does that person do things that can impact you? But no, they don't cause you to do that. So
That's
yeah,
right.
I think everybody does play a role. Everybody has a story, but sure, there are moments. And I say that being the first to say there are plenty of times. I know it's exciting. There are plenty of times when I was wrong, when I'm the one who's wrong, when I'm the one who needed to change and I made a mistake. Like so it's not like I say it like it's everybody else. There are plenty of moments in my life where I was the one who was wrong. You want to be on the show or not? Come on.
Yeah, she sure was showing some interest.
Yeah.
Nah, she's bored now.
Yeah.
It's like when I try to bring my granddaughter on the camera. She don't want nothing to do with it and tell us she's not on it anymore.
Well, I'm probably gonna get her this medicine here shortly,
Yeah.
so I think I'm a little bit over for that. So
Yeah, I understand.
Listen, it's a great conversation, and I'm grateful to meet you and to have this time together.
Well, like I said, it's probably, people were probably expecting to hear, some, really not that it wasn't an in-depth conversation, but probably something so profound that was just going to fix the problem that we have. But I wanted to get people thinking about that and to introduce them to yield theory and introduce them to you and really want to get them looking into, taking a look at walking through anger. But you have another book out there. Yeah.
I've got
Several actually.
Stories.
Yeah.
Which
by the way, he is a great storyteller, folks. So please, if do.
Thank you. And Life Lessons. Life Lessons was the initial book that it was the one I always wanted to teach, or I always wanted to write, which was it's 1 to 2 pages of stories with lessons. So you can flip open to a random page and be like, hey, let me learn, restoring balance in the family, or absolute truth, or the prisoner, bunch of stuff. Or Ptolemy was an expert. I just saw that one, which is funny because when you think about it, Ptolemy was an expert. And when people sometimes say, well, you're an expert, you have to listen to the experts. Well, yeah, Ptolemy was an expert too. And pretty sure he said that the sun, that the Earth was the center of the universe. So.
Yes, he may have been off on something there.
Yeah, he may have been off, even though he was an expert, right? It's an expert at the time. So
always trust the science, right? Always
right.
trust.
Right. So yeah, I have a bunch of different books. This one's a super helpful one. It's using the prison system, but the truth is, this could be effective for people across the board. It's
Absolutely.
about it's tons of personal growth experiences, and then I have books that are specifically for prison, like personal growth in alternative housing units. But I also have a book called Zen Parent, Zen Child, which my wife said that's one of her favorite books that I wrote. It's got to be here somewhere. But it's a book about trying to understand. It's a book largely of reflections, where I talk about my 4 C's of parenting: choices, consequences, consistency, and compassion. But also give people a lot to reflect on and meditate on. And I think my dog is calling it for the end of the end of
you
the
have you do have a podcast, real quick. Where can people find that?
I do, anywhere on iTunes. I think the one with Ray Lewis and I, called Tackling Life, is still available. We don't still actively record. I do one called Emotional Management, and I would love for people to check that out. And if there's one thing I would love for people to check out, probably it's my Walking Through Anger book. But if there's a second thing people are willing to check out, it would be my YouTube channel. I'm doing more and more on that. And upcoming, my wife and I are going to do a whole thing for couples, and we're going to put it on there.
And that channel is?
Just Dr. Christian Conte.
There we go. Dr. Conte, I really appreciate your time. You go take care of your pooch, and I'll close out with my final thoughts, and I'll let you know when this is up.
Hey, thank you so much, and I would definitely be happy to come talk to you again in the future.
It'd be
great to meet you.
I love it. So we'll stay in touch. Thank you, sir.
All right, brother. Take care.
Have a good day.
You too.
Folks, Dr. Christian Conte, I cannot emphasize enough how much you really do need to check out Walking Through Anger. I don't care who you are. I don't care what your perspective is. I don't care what philosophical worldview you have, Christian, atheist, agnostic, deist, whatever. His book is phenomenal, and it will help you. It absolutely 100% will help you. So please do check it out. Check out Yield Theory. You can find Dr. Conte on his YouTube channel. And a big shout out to Jake from Guns and Mental Health and Noggin Notes. Jake is a friend. He's in my inner circle. And I cannot say enough positive things about him. And one of those is his ability to glean the information that he has gleaned and how it's impacted him as a person from what he's learned from Dr. Conte. So, folks, real quick, please head over once again to the subscribe star. Follow me on Twitter @RobeRegiment. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. And start learning to talk to people, to respond to people, not as Dr. Conte said, not where you think they should be, but where they actually are, and let that influence and inform your conversations. And for those of you that are part of the police and public servant and public elected servant accountability community, try to understand what ego does, because you're as impacted by your ego as the cop that you're talking to is impacted by his own ego or her own ego. It's very important for us to understand that. When you see him do something good, let him know. That opens doors. That absolutely 100% does open doors. I'm working on some stuff coming up that I think you guys are going to find very interesting. So we'll see where it goes. See if it takes off. I think there are going to be some fun conversations coming up. So until next time, my friends, fight for your liberty. It is yours. Fight for your freedom. It belongs to you. In Sic Semper, Tyrannus.
We are going for liftoff in T-30.
Stand by for further instructions, Minnesota Black Robe Regiment. target. You are authorized to fire at